Good evening, friends. Thank you for joining me to discuss, to review, and I would even say to celebrate the materialist traditions of India. But when we say India, what do we really mean? The time that I refer to when I talk about ancient materialism, there was no India, there were just little kingdoms. What is today India, Bangladesh, Nepal, Pakistan, Afghanistan are all within the idea of India when I say the materialist traditions of India. The idea of India, the name India is all very new. So I just want you to pay attention to that fact. We're not talking about what is today known as India geographically. Let me read out something to you. O King, there is no consequence to almsgiving, sacrifice, or oblation. A good or a bad action produces no result. There is no rebirth of beings after death. In this world, there are no Sramanas or Brahmanas established in the noble path and accomplished in good practice, who through direct knowledge acquired by their own efforts can expound on this world and the other world. This being is but a compound of the four great primary elements. After death, the earth element returns and goes back to the body of the earth. The water element returns and goes back to the body of water. The fire element returns and goes back to the body of fire. And the air element goes back to the body of air. While the mental faculties pass on space. All almsgiving ends in ashes. Some assert that there is such a thing as merit in almsgiving, but their words are empty, false, and nonsensical. The fool and the wise, both are annihilated and destroyed after death and the dissolution of their bodies. Nothing exists after death. The man who gave this address to the king, who invited him to speak to him about the nature of life and the universe, was a senior contemporary of the person today known as the Buddha. So we are talking somewhere in the 600 before the Common Era, year 600 before the Common Era. We are talking about 300 years before Eusebius, the author of De Rerum Natura, before Epicurus, who was not a complete atheist, but was somewhere in that area. We are talking about 100 odd years before Socrates. We're talking of a senior contemporary of the Buddha. Ajita Kesa Kambali, the name is a very interesting name. This is a man who is never defeated in disputation and who wears a cloak made of human hair. Now, whether he was so hirsute or whether he really did something with human hair, what others did with wool is not clear. This is a man given to asceticism who was living a life in the forests of the time. Most of that region was forest and wild. Of that, there is no doubt. This is a man who was very, very impatient with the Buddha, saying, why can't you make clear your position about the existence of God? Because the Buddha was asked, do you believe? The Buddha conducted a series of dialogues with people in a democratic setting where people could come to him and ask questions and disagree with him. It was, for that time, and even for today's India, a period of open discussion and debate with no repercussions for your thoughts and beliefs. And the Buddha said, of that we will never know. So it is better to move on rather than be detained by the question of whether there was a God or not. Not so Ajita Kesa Kambali. He chastised the Buddha and said, give your answer, have the courage to say that there is no God, that there is no afterlife. But the Buddha, of course, believed in a rebirth, though he did not believe in a soul. We are talking of a time when on Earth there were about 250 million humans, not many in the geographical region of India that I defined for you. You had people traveling from one part of the land to another, freely discussing, arguing, exchanging ideas. The first recorded ideas of the time come to us from what is considered revelation by many Hindus, the Vedas, the Rig Veda, where there is a creation hymn that is recited by people to show that there was no dogmatism in the beliefs of the peoples who recited the Rig Veda about 1500 years before the Common Era. So they are speculating, they are wondering, they are questioning, but they are still in the domain of poetry. They are not in the domain of fact or even philosophy. But they are wondering. And they are saying, does he even know how this universe came about? So they were not fixed on the idea of a creator God throwing ideas at each other. Now, where was all this happening? We believe it was happening starting from what is today's Afghanistan to the borders of today's Bangladesh. There were universities, there were people sitting together discussing. Universities which had a few thousand pupils sitting down and reading and reciting and questioning each other about their concepts of the universe, of what was good and what was not. This was all happening after the Indus Valley civilization, which is 3,000 years before the Common Era. So, just to get a sense of how things are, there was the Indus Valley civilization, whose script we have not been able to decipher, if there were scripts at all. they might just be symbolisms. So we are talking of the time after that. And to the left of what is in the brown, marking the Indus Valley civilization, emerged what was called a university later, the head of which was a Buddhist. So Buddhism came much after the Indus Valley civilization, much after. But between the Indus Valley civilization and Buddhism came the Vedas, the Rig Veda, of which I gave you an extract. And the head of the University of Takshashila wrote what is considered an extraordinary human achievement, the first scientific grammar of any language, written in 8 chapters, hence called the Astadhyayi. And in that, which is about 600 years before the Common Era, in that the term Nastik is used by the grammarian Panini, the head of the Takshashila University. And Panini defines the Nastiks as those who do not believe in the existence of a God. By a God, we mean a creator God, because there can be minor gods with super strengths, more than that of humans. But here they are talking about creator gods. And the second word, Nastika, is the word used to describe by Panini the atheists, or to term them, those who do not believe in a God. We are talking of words that were being used 2,600 years ago. We know how over 100 years words acquire new meanings, different nuances to their meanings and so on. The time when Panini was using it was when he said, these are people who do not believe in a God. But many people use the word Nastik in many different ways. Some of them said, these are the people who have rejected the authority of the Vedas. So if you believed in the Veda as a valid source of knowledge, then you were an Astika, the first. If you did not believe in the Vedas as divine knowledge, as revealed knowledge, as authentic, authoritative source of information and knowledge, then you would be Nastika. Then there were others who said the Nastikas were the ones who rejected the afterlife, the ones who rejected the existence, the concept of a soul. Actually, when we refer to the materialists of the past of that time, while individuals may have one belief and not the other, when we say Nastika, we really mean someone who has rejected the Vedas, who has rejected the idea of a soul, and who has rejected the idea of rebirth and the afterlife. Now, there are 4 other names that words that we can come back to at some point. Brihaspati is possibly the first materialist that we can give a name to in this story. And the school which believed in what he did and propagated his ideas is what is called the first of the words, Hospatya. Then Nastika Mata, so almost the beliefs of the non-believers. Charvaka, this is a word and a name that you will see very often when we speak about materialism, atheism, skepticism in the past, in India's past. And Lokayata, those who are bothered by the this worldly rather than what is beyond this world. So these are words that we come across frequently I am only giving you an overview of what can be an exciting field of study so that you may feel interested and curious enough to do your own reading about these marvelous people. Now, also the word Bhutavadin was used, meaning the ones who believe in the elements, meaning the ones who believe in the natural, not in the supernatural. We are still talking about people living about 600 and definitely a lot more previous to that, years before, 600 years before the common era, by when this thinking crystallized. There were schools, there were people, sages, they said, who traveled around preaching what they believed in. So it was an established mode of thinking, and many considered that this was not just a few intellectuals, just a few people. It was widely spread. They were all using, at that time, until the Buddha changed it, Ajita Kesa Kambali too, to speak in Pali language. They were all using the Sanskrit language, which the religious believe is a language of the gods and so on. That it is a language which has special attributes and characteristics. That is special, it's given by the gods. Except that now it is known that Sanskrit, which was never ever written in the India I'm talking about, till about 100 years before the Common Era, was already being written in the Mitanni kingdom, which is where today's Turkey, Syria and Iraq lie. So the people who were ruling that region, the kings, the Mitanni kings, were a martial race. They believed and they valued chariots. They had a military manual to teach people how to look after their horses and their chariots. And in that are names and words that are used in the Sanskrit of the Rig Vedas. So what happened? Did the people from India go there? Or is it people from there who came to India? Neither. It's people from Kazakhstan who were migrating. Some went to this region. The others came towards Afghanistan, today's Pakistan, India, the Gangetic Plains. So that was the Mitanni people. The language before Sanskrit was written in the Brahmi script, and this is a replica of a copy of a copy of a copy of Panini's writings. If you would like to know more about the thinkers of that time who rejected the idea of a soul, who did not believe in the afterlife, who rejected the idea of rebirth, but who also focused on this world, then I would recommend a book like Lokayata, which is a serious study by Devi Prasad Chattopadhyaya on the ideas of the atheists of the time, of the Gnostics of the time. A small complication, which I will not dwell too much on, and that is this. The word astika, which was used for those who believed in the Vedas and their authenticity and their authority, is today used to talk of one who believes in God. But then it was not used for one who believed in a God. It was one who believed in the Vedas. Nastika then was one who rejected the afterlife, the soul, and rejected the Vedas. Today, that is used to denote an atheist, someone who does not believe in God. The more appropriate words today are Ishwaravad and Nirishwaravad, the one who believes in God and the one who does not. I introduce these words because if you are really going into the story, then this can be irritating, that the heterodox school of ancient Indian thinking, which include the Jains, the Buddhists, the Charvakas, the Lokayatas, they all are called Gnostic. But the Jains and the Buddhists, not the Buddha himself, but the Buddhists, do believe in a kind of a God. So there's been extrapolations, there's been pollution in what the thinking was. So it can be a bit confusing if you were to look at it carefully. I am averting that. Now here is Ajita Kesa Kambali again. Look at what he is saying. He is saying, this is Ajita Kesa Kambali's friend, Sanjaya. Sanjaya, who is saying to the king again, if you ask me whether there is another world, well, if I thought there were, I would say so. But I don't say so. And I don't think it is thus or thus. I don't think it is otherwise. I don't deny it. I don't say there neither is nor not another world. That's the agnostic of the time. Saying, look, I don't know. I don't know about the afterlife. I will say not that it is not existing. I will not say that it is existing. So you had Ajita Kesa Kambali very clear about the existence of the world and the non-existence of the afterworld, afterlife. And you had Sanjaya, who was an agnostic. And they were the Charvakas. Now, I just wanted you to read these. These are taken from, you probably never read it for that, but from the Kama Sutra. The Kama Sutra quotes what the Charvakas said. Pithy statements, not in, well, if you, I'm sure you have read it already. They are telling people what they think about life, the world, and how people should live. How do we know the Charvakas said these things? There is not a single authentic version or book or tome of what the Charvakas ever said. You talk of the Charvakas, the Lokayatas, still something like after the era of Emperor Ashoka. And then for nearly 1,000 years, there is not much being said. They just go off the radar. Just don't hear about them anymore. at least not in the north of the country. So what people did is they looked into the rival literature, the literature of the opposition, to rebuild what the Charvakas said. Who were their opposition? Their opposition were the Jains, surprisingly, the Buddhists, and of course the Orthodox Hindus, by which I mean the philosophical schools of Hinduism. They were disputing, arguing, rejecting, reviling, abusing, and from there you can reconstruct what the Charvakas were saying. They were also people with a sense of humor. The Buddha cautioned, counseled kindness, compassion, and said animal sacrifice is not good. The Buddha was not a vegan or a vegetarian. His last meal was pork. But the Buddha was talking of not causing unnecessary pain. Now, the Charvakas were not just preaching, they were needling. They said, if you sacrifice an animal and then the animal will go to heaven, then why doesn't the sacrificer chop his father's head off and dispatch him to heaven? So, not particularly friendly, but I think they had the freedom to talk like this at that time. Now, they are pushing the logic of people or pushing people towards thinking logically. And they are saying, if the sacrificial act will give you positive results, then surely if trees are burnt like in sacrifice, they should also be flourishing. And they reveal their mind, because they are reacting to the religious practices and beliefs of their time. And they are saying the fire sacrifice, your 3 Vedas, the 3 staves that the religious leaders were carrying, smearing yourself with ashes. They were made for the livelihood of those who had no knowledge and no honor. This is what they mean. They are saying something that the Buddha said. The Buddha said, the Buddha never does niche, lowly things like divining the future, looking into the signs in nature and tell you what is auspicious or not. The Buddha said, I don't do that. The Charvakas are saying, this is cheating people. In China, so vibrant and active were the schools of that time, the philosophical schools of that time. You see in sculpture, the heretics of the age. Heretics to the traditional Hindus. Why are they heretics? They're heretics because they are rejecting everything that was being believed in by the majoritarian religion of the time. They were made fun of and they were vilified as people who only counseled hedonism, borrowing money and eating sumptuous meals and not caring for anyone or anyone's welfare. But the lie is given when you go into the mythology of the same people who were vilifying them. In the Mahabharata, when the emperor is waging another of his how shall I say, expansionist ventures and conducting an Ashwamedha Yaga. Wherever the horse wanders, that land will belong to the emperor. In the court of the emperor are the Charvakas who stand up and say to the emperor, will a war not cause death and destruction? And do you not, O emperor, have enough of land? They were killed. So, if that story is to go by, for concluding what they advocated, we know that they were counseling peace. If they were telling people not to kill animals, they couldn't be the ones saying, live a hedonistic life with no moral responsibility. Think well, think straight is what they were teaching people. And they said, they have rejected the Vedas as a source of final authority. And they said, depend on perception. Believe that which you can see and feel. And they also propose that deductive thinking would also be valid, by which they mean, I have seen this, therefore this is likely to be correct. They said that. And very, very interestingly, this is the new insight into their thinking that is being revealed. They rejected what the traditional mainstream Hindu beliefs were about the origins of humanity. The origins of humanity, according to the Purusha Sukta, was that the Brahmin, the highest in the hierarchy of human division and discrimination, comes from the head of the Lord. The next ones, who are warriors, come from the arms, and from the thighs, the business people. The lower most in the caste hierarchy, from the feet, the Shudras, the lowly. And of course, those who do not even belong in the caste system are the untouchables, the cast outs. The Charvakas rejected that. What do you think the implication of that is? The implication of that is that they believed in human equality. Not only is it an implication, in the great classic Manimekalai in Tamil Nadu, I think in the 4th or the 5th century of the Common Era, to the heroine of the story is being told that such are the Lokayatas, that they believe in the equality of people, and that they do not accept that women are lowly. Isn't that fantastic? We are talking about 1500 years ago, when someone is narrating what their beliefs are and saying these extraordinary things about their belief systems. The interesting thing about the story of non-belief, disbelief, skepticism, materialism of that time is that it had always a moral lesson. If you study Buddhism, if you look at what the Buddha believed in, surely for the modern mind, there is not much of great value about his concept of the universe, the physical concept of the universe. But you don't go to the Buddha to understand how the universe is constructed. You don't go to the Lokayatas, the Charvakas, to understand that. You go to them to seek inspiration from a class, a group of people, a school of thinkers, schools of thinkers, who stopped looking for the final answers in the supernatural and started finding them in the natural. The first attempts to understand the universe in natural terms, in terms that you can feel, perceive, verify, and logically deduct from. That is what is precious in the early skepticism, the proto-materialism of the time. They were talking of the four elements. These four elements are tangible. With more science, more insight, more instruments, we know those elements are not four, but there are 130 of them. But the first attempts were there. So what is the important contribution of the Buddha at that time? For a world that did not need a God to understand the universe, for a world of people who wanted to understand what the correct ethics for their society were, the Buddha came with an idea and a definition of goodness. What right living is, right thinking is, right action is, what the middle way could be. And in all of this, the Buddha never invoked a God. The first secular morality that we are able to trace in historical terms, the first materialists that you can give a name to would be, from what I said, would be India for our purpose of our discussion. And they were heralding a human society which recognized the value of women, which accepted the dignity of all people. And I'm not extrapolating. These are the accounts of the thinking of that time by the rival literature who were castigating them for thinking that all humans were equal. First rejecting the idea of Manu, that a woman can lead you astray and the woman is lowly and can be deceiving you. And these people were not agreeing to that. I hope to have given you some idea about ancient Indian materialism. If we come closer to our time, say 300 years ago, 400 years ago, they were thinkers like Vemana who were rationalists but not really atheist, at least not how they are portrayed to us, who were announcing, declaring and demanding that all humans be treated equal. Does not the same blood course through your veins and that of the untouchable? Vemana is castigating the castes of his time. What the modern humanist, rationalist, materialist tradition of India is, would be the subject of another meeting for us. But I will tell you this much. The atmosphere, the cultural inputs of India's heritage were such that when India and the Constituent Assembly working on the text of the Indian Constitution in the late 1940s sat down together, nearly 300 of them, almost each of them religious, had a proposal that the preamble of the Indian Constitution should start with an invocation to the Supreme Being, the Divine Lord, and that group of religious people said that would be very sectarian, that would be against the freedom of religion of all the people. And one person, H.V. Kamath, insisted on putting his proposal to the vote of recognizing the Supreme Being in the Indian Constitution. And God lost by a few votes because the Constituent Assembly said, no, we do not want the invocation of God. Later, in rather peculiar circumstances, in the Indian Constitution was introduced an amendment to the preamble itself, where the word secular was introduced. Of course, you should recognize that the ones who amended the Indian Constitution then realized the real importance of having secular because of how society still was. And they also introduced into Article 51 AH, which calls on all the citizens of India as their fundamental duty. Everyone knows what the fundamental rights are, but as their fundamental duties. The responsibility, the duty of every citizen to promote the scientific temper, the spirit of social reform, and the spirit of humanism with a small h. So the ones who were working on the Constitution recognized fully the need of the times. And the need of the times today in India is a revival of that grand tradition of what was called the first revolution in human thinking as charted in the history of humanity. The first atheists, materialists, skeptics, rationalists, the first secular moralist, inspired by whom? Emperor Ashoka, who was a dictator, who was a warmonger till he got introduced to Buddhism, converted to the religion, established hospitals even for animals, and asked the people of his country to be compassionate. Today we live in a country in all of South Asia where leaders and peoples are looking for war and asking for strife and looking to defeat others. Here is this emperor influenced by the first materialist of the region, asking people to espouse peace, to dialogue and to negotiate, asking the people of the country to look after the elderly and to not ill-treat the servants at home. These are all in the edicts of Emperor Ashoka. From that time to now, there has been progress in the way humanist thinking move forward in the geography, but it is under serious stress and strain today. I am sorry to say that. I will just indicate a few things. This is Dr. Dabolkar, whose organization I got introduced to and made a member of what is today called the Humanist International, of which, Mark, I was the director, not the president. Dr. Dabolkar, called for a law against superstition. Not the belief, but the exploitation of it. You can believe what you want, but if someone wants to make a business out of it, sell you charms and deceive you and so on, that there should be punishment. Dr. Dabholkar in 2013 was assassinated. And 10 years after, there still is no tracing of Dabholkar's assassins. All he wanted was a law to protect the believers. He was an atheist. He was fighting for the rights of the believers so that they may not be cheated. Dabholkar was told that there was a plan to kill him and he should get police protection. You know what he said? He said, I'm the head of an organization with 25,000 members. If I get the police protection, they will kill the others. If someone has to die, it should be me, because I am their leader. And they got him. The 10 years since his assassination saw the killing of 3 more rationalists, humanists. There was Gobind Pansare. There was Professor Kalburgi, a former vice-chancellor of a university. And Gauri Lankesh, a fiery rationalist, human rights activist, feminist. They were killed. And it is now understood that the same weapon was used to kill all the 4. So there is a plan by terrorists who have been undeterred. They could use the same weapon 4 times. The protection for the rationalists, the humanists, who laid the grounds for modern Indian civilization, is today lacking, which is a jump from the time of Periyar, who died in the 1970s, who was a great cultural icon in the country. And look, Periyar boldly said, starting from the 1930s at least, also in the 20s, up to the 70s, he said this boldly, loudly, and political parties were established inspired by his ideas of self-respect, anti-superstition, an egalitarian society, and his passionate commitment to fighting caste. And those political parties came to power in the state of Tamil Nadu in South India. They came to power on a rationalist, atheist, social reform, anti-caste discrimination agenda. Things have changed a bit. And there are now petitions in the High Court. Incidentally, the High Court protects still the freedom of speech and the statements made by Periyar. People went to court saying it was offensive to them that he was saying that there was no God. And the court protected the freedom of speech of Periyar. And those who believe and agree, believe with him and agree with him. There are hundreds of statues in the state of Tamil Nadu with that statement on statues. So the petition in the court was seeking to invoke blasphemy protections and get rid of it, but it did not work yet. If you want to know something about Periyar, I would suggest that you look at this book, Naipaul, the Nobel laureate of 2001, literature Nobel laureate. India, a million mutinies now. I think at least 60 pages of that book, at least the version I've seen, has an account of the Periyar Dravidian movement. I believe I've taken up an hour completely now, so I will stop here before you nod off to sleep. And I'm open to any questions you may have. But my focus was the ancient Indian materialism, rationalism, skepticism, which is not dealt with in depth by many people. And the ones who do deal with it fall into this trap of the opposition to think that these are moral-less people living a hedonistic life. I tried to show to you that that was not logically possible. Thank you.